welcome to segment 6.4. Let's talk about patent strategies, how they're applied, what exactly they are, and what can we do with them. So I'm on page 256 in the reading, and my first question is, when would patent strategies be applied to a patent application? So the application of these patent strategies often goes into when you are actually creating the patent application. You're thinking about each of these strategies. Now, each of the strategies that are indicated are used after the patent is actually granted. But as far as when they are being applied, it's really at the very fundamental stage when you are actually writing and creating that patent specification. The second question is, how is a defensive versus offensive patent fundamentally different in how they are prepared? And as my second question in that sentence indicates, or is there no difference? And the answer to that is, there is no difference. You would prepare an offensive and a defensive patent in the same exact manner. The only question is how it is being used that differs. So later on, the patent is being used defensively to respond to, for example, some patent assertion against you, whereas it could be used offensively using the same exact rationale, but now it's just being used to go after companies that potentially are infringing your patent. So, but as far as preparation, it's almost exactly the same as far as offensive versus defensive. So with respect to the slides, I like to start with this slide. It gives you an idea very much kind of from a very tangible point of view as to how it is that patents can protect the inventions that are going on. So what we have here is a classic example of a castle, and that castle is being constructed often to house the treasures inside. So I lived in Europe for a little while, and you go inside of these castles and they often will take you into where it is that their treasury actually was as well. And that treasury was very much a fortress. That fortress that was surrounding would protect the valuables inside. In some instances, it actually was treasure. And in other instances, it was the church that was inside. In some instances, it was just the citizens themselves that were being protected. But in short, you have these walls, and inside was very much the inner treasure of what was being protected. You often would have a moat outside, and that moat would provide some defense against whatever was coming against you. You would have the archerymen on the castle as well. That's providing some offensive use as well, where they could be going after people. And last but not least, but you have people in boats coming to the rescue of the castle. And these could be some allegiances with other countries. So when we look at patent strategies, it is often within the context almost very similar to defending a castle. So we have core technology. Core technology really is what is the most fundamental part, process, device, method that is associated with invention. And so we would construe this as very much our inner treasure that we're trying to protect. Once we have our inner treasure protected, then we can start building up the walls, we can start building the moat, things of that nature. So we want to protect the most fundamental core part of what has been invented. Second, market conditions or market protection really looks at, okay, where is the market going? And if our competitor is heading in this way, then we may want to consider also heading in this way. So it's a response to the market such that you have these almost implicit allegiances with either the competitors, and that may be a friendly allegiance, maybe a competitive type allegiance. You also have these offense and defensive mechanisms where you want to be able to use patents or defend using patents, and so this the strategy that's being used here will cover different aspects of your invention. Well, what do we actually talk about? When I say a core technology or market protection, offensive, defensive, does that mean that we have different types of patents? And the reality is no. Often you will have just one patent that is written, but the goal is to be able to incorporate all these different strategies when you're actually creating your specification in relation to that invention. Let's talk about each of these strategies. The first is core technologies. I've indicated this is kind of the inner treasure of our castle. The focus, as I indicated, is protecting the core invention. How do you do this? How do you actually protect the core invention? Well, you may file multiple applications. Each of those may be based off of the same specification, but it would be a more narrow type construction of the invention. So this would allow you potentially to hone in very quickly on what the invention is. So you make sure that from a narrow construction point of view, you have that covered, and then you might start taking a step back and trying to add other fences around. Now, when we talk about these strategies, I think it's helpful to also think of it from the point of view of fences. So this core technology would be, let's say, the immediate fence around your playground that you're trying to protect. When you start looking at these other strategies, it's all about taking additional fence lines around that original area that you have protected by your original fence line. And so you might have an area, a geographic area around a tree that's next to the playground that you also want to protect, or you might want to just get a global wraparound fence over the entire area as well. So in short, patents and patent claims represent fences, and the idea of these types of strategies is about expanding your fence to the extent possible based off of what it is that has been invented. Now, I've indicated as well that you can protect core technology by filing multiple applications. Now, the way that you would do that is you might have one initial application, and you might get a narrow type claim set that protects this core invention. But let's say that the core invention is a sprocket or some gear assembly on a bicycle. And when you look at the core invention, you may say, well, it's the design of the teeth. It's the teeth themselves that is really kind of the core technology. And so you may get one claim set just off of the teeth that's being used in the sprocket. And then you say, okay, now that we kind of have that core concept covered, we should probably cover how it is that the teeth are interfacing with another sprocket. And so now you're starting to build on the whole concept of attaching one thing to another thing. So it's all these narrow, very kind of bits and pieces that each may be different core technology in its own light. But as we start to branch out, that allows us to take a more global perspective as to what has been invented, where we look at the sprocket in context of the entire bicycle. And rather than just simply going for a teeth assembly type system, you may say, looking at the bicycle as a whole, it's a human-driven propulsion system. So it's a different perspective as to how it is that you're really claiming it. Core technology, as you see here, we may have, with the overlap Venn diagrams, core technology 1, 2, and 3, and what you really want to do starting now is protecting where it is that there is the most overlap, because that really would be our most fundamental component of what is going on. I have two examples here, one of a mechanical invention of a windshield wiper, and we may want to protect the overall structure of the wiper, but we also may want to just protect the fastener and how it is that it's attaching to the vehicle, or how it is the methods that's being used to actually construct the wiper. So you might have one of a use, you might have one of actually making. Keep in mind, a patent protects the making, using, or selling the patented invention. Software invention may be an online application, but there may be different types of parts that you might want to protect in relation to that invention. You may have an algorithm that's being used to actually implement specific aspects of that application. You may have a user-side interface. How it is that the interface that's being used to actually convey the information or to interact with the application. In that manner, you might have a client-side, a server-side type interaction, and each of these interactions would need to be claimed separately. And so you may have several core technology type patents looking at the narrow construction of each of these. Now, as far as market protection, the big question here is to simply ask, what you have invented, where is it going in 10 years? And this is a question often that not a lot of inventors or even patent attorneys for that matter often will ask. They'll go in, they'll do a core technology type patent, but they will not take the step back and take an extra 30 minutes an hour and ask that question of how is your invention even going to be implemented in 10 years? If the Wright brothers had done that, they may have said, okay, well, what if the fabric that's being used for the wings was different? And they may say, well, that's not possible because we need light fabric based off of our engine. Okay, but what if our engine had a better horsepower to thrust ratio to weight ratio? If that were the case, they'd say, well, maybe we can make the wings more firm. And if they're more firm, how are we going to turn them? Well, we might need some little mechanism that goes up and down. So if they had taken a little bit more time and anticipated where does the market and improvements might occur over the next 10 years, they may have been better aligned to the market when it actually caught up to them. So this is very much a thinking outside of the box type question that you can ask the inventors of, tell me ways in which you think the innovation in relation to your invention will continue over the next 10 years, because it allows you to really kind of fill in some of these gaps. If we are taking a more narrow construction of the specification, which is often what occurs today, then you want to make sure that your specification is well covered, that you're anticipating where that market is really going to go. So this may be a very in-depth type specification. Normal specification length is, I would say for most patents, in the range of about 20 pages. If you're starting to look at market protection, and if you're incorporating offensive, defensive type strategies into your patent, it may very well be 80, 100 plus pages. So because you're really trying to get everything in relation to that invention within one core document. So there's different types of market protection patents. You may have a fence patent, which is used to fence in your competition, and that's why it's called a fence patent. Or on the other hand, so you may, for example, let's just start with that. You have a competitor that's coming up and you notice that their fence line is very close to yours. And you say, okay, well, what can we do here? Well, what we could do is file an additional patent that broadens our fence a little bit to really pin them in, where they cannot go beyond the current confines of their patent. And so a fence-in patent might allow, and again, this would be application of the market protection type strategy after it has been granted. So you have a patent, you go through the process, and a few years from now, your competitor is coming up, they're starting to get close to your fence line. You can then use that patent to file a continuation with a claim set that specifically fixes the fence line right up against where your competitor is, which effectively prevents them from expanding more into the jurisdiction that you own. So on one hand, that may be used to extend your own fence line. On the other hand, that may be used to limit the fence line of your competitor. Design around patents is, for example, if your competitor has disclosed a circuit board, as my example indicates, with an element A, a design around may include designing a similar circuit board but with element B. So you're asking the question, okay, competitor has released element A, and you may go back to the drawing board and say, all right, up until now, element B was never feasible because of X, Y, and Z. And we now have a new novel way of actually using element B with the same type of construction of what our competitor is using. So it allows you to, again, get very close to what your competitors are doing, but also be integrating some novel type concepts that previously may not have existed. Now, as far as strategy for a market protection, if you want to be able to modify your claims, which is often what occurs in a market type application, where 10 years from now, your patent may be potentially infringed, but how the market is actually using your patent may not be exactly what it is that was in your original claim set. If you have a patent continuation application pending, that allows you to still modify the claims. So, and again, we are not using hindsight here to modify what was invented. That's the key point. We are using market conditions now to simply match language in our patent application that was already disclosed. So if in our original disclosure, if our claim set, if in the specification, let's say that we describe elements A through M, but in our claim set, we say the claims must include A, B, and C. And then the market 10 years later comes back and says, well, actually, we've determined rather than doing A, B, and C, we're going to do A, B, and D. But if you didn't have an open continuation, that means that your claim set for A, B, and C is not applicable to the market, which is doing A, B, and D. But if you have an open continuation, you can go back and claim A, B, and D because it was part of your original disclosure in the specification. You can only do that in all reality if you have what's called an open continuation. And so when I talk about keeping at least one family member alive, that is what it's talking about, that within the patent family, you are keeping the patent family alive by filing continuations. As far as offensive, defensive work, this kind of looks, as far as the strategy that's going into the patent application itself, you are building it out in a similar manner to market type protection, where you're really being very robust in your descriptions, you're being very thorough and very precise. And the application of the strategy later on after it's granted, as far as offensive, defensive type use, market protection looks very much at responding to influences within the market. So you may fence in your competition, you may extend your own fence line. Both of those may be construed as an offensive type measure or a defensive type measure. So this really kind of builds upon this notion of putting a lot into the patent specification, which allows you to use the patent application as a real asset of the company later on. So some of the key takeaways from this is that why do we get IP protection? And it's all about leveraging what it is that we are doing. Obviously, we want to protect the core assets, and that is what the concept behind core technology gets at, is that you're protecting what is very much the fundamental aspects of the invention. When you start talking about market protection, offensive, defensive use, what you're really doing is looking at leveraging your position in the market. And so what patents allow you to do is to increase that leveraging potential. You can position the company in the market, you can position the company against other competitors. And both of these strategic type alignments allow you to increase, again, your leveraging potential. Now, as I indicated at the outset of Module 6, IP protection may differ based off of the life cycle of the company, again, which we will discuss in later segments as well.